It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 534 be adopted. Representative Stokesbary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is about a choice. Unlike most budget discussions we have on this floor, it's not a choice about spending priorities. This amendment would leave intact every single funding decision that's been made in the underlying budget bill. Every agency, program, service, contract, local government partner that's funded by this budget would still be funded even if this amendment were adopted. Instead, Mr. Speaker, this amendment is about a choice regarding how we pay for those things. It's about a choice to fund the budget with revenue that we're entitled to assume by statute or a tax increase that we don't need. This budget, thankfully, funds the Working Families Tax Credit for the first time in that program's history. But in the underlying budget bill, it's assumed it's funded by an account that receives revenue from an assumed capital gains tax bill. And if another economic downturn hits and capital gains tax revenue decreases, revenue to that account will be the first to go away, which means that Working Families Tax Credit will be the program that is first on the chopping block. The other things that would be funded by the capital gains tax that's assumed in this budget are childcare and higher ed funding. Mr. Speaker, I think that those things ought to be among the last things we consider unfunding, but by relying on and incorporating a capital gains tax, we risk those things because the capital gains tax itself is so inherently volatile and unpredictable. And this amendment would make sure that we do not have to deal with that volatility and that unpredictability. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is also about a choice to fund a budget that will help promote and accelerate a recovery, or pass a budget that relies on a tax that will hamper our recovery by disincentivizing entrepreneurs and innovators from betting on Washington.
The Speaker's about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. The clerk will announce the totals.
Mr. Speaker, there are 41 yeas, 52 nays, 0 excused.
The amendment is not adopted. It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 512 be adopted. Representative Corry.
For us to take money out of an emergency fund that the citizens of Washington have said we want to protect and make sure that there is a supermajority there when time is needed is concerning. We have proven time and time again over this past year that we are more than willing and able and ready to step up and spend that money as the state needs and sees fit. However, we're not doing that now. And in order for us to continue to appreciate that spirit of what's in the underlying philosophy of the BSA, we should put those monies back until we are actually ready to use them. And if we're not going to use them now, we don't need to move them. This would be akin to us saying, in my family, we have an emergency account and we find there's emergency, we go move the money, and then the insurance comes in and makes the payment, and then I just leave it out there and spend it on something else. No, the money should go back into that emergency account in case there's another emergency. While I think most of us are hopeful that that won't happen, the fact that we're willing to do that and leave ourselves short in the event of a potential another issue or emergency is rather concerning. So what this amendment would do is simply return the spirit of what the BSA is back to it by putting that money back and saying that we are going to honor the terms of the Budget Stabilization Account and why we need to keep it there. Please vote yes.
The Speaker's about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Clerk, take the record, please.
Mr. Speaker, there are 43 yeas, 54 nays, 1 excused.
The amendment is not adopted. And go substitute Senate Bill 5092 on third reading and final passage as amended by the House.
This budget represents a 13% increase over the last biennium budget. Just since the governor was elected in the 2012 election, since then, the state budget has grown 72% in just a mere 4 biennium. That kind of growth rate, Mr. Speaker, is not sustainable.
I don't think we've heard any arguments from our side of the aisle today, Mr. Speaker, that the programs and the needs that we're funding aren't important and they aren't a priority. They are, and we agree, and we want to fund them. And we've offered a path and a solution that funds them in a manner that is fiscally responsible and protects our future spending and our future revenue needs. Unfortunately, I'm going to be a no today, and I'm going to ask you and others to be a no as well, because this budget isn't there, and it's got assumptions in it that I think are going to harm us in the long run.
Because this budget relies on a capital gains tax, I cannot support this bill today at this time. The constituents in my district have made it very, very clear they are opposed to a capital gains tax. And it's been said, but I'm particularly concerned that we are tying important funding to such a volatile income source. And, you know, I sort of think of the state of Washington as having a welcome sign out front. Welcome to Washington. Let's do business here. And we're taking that down and saying, Washington is not going to be a good place to invest, to come and create jobs. We've lost 70,000 manufacturing jobs, and we're trying to come up with legislation that will bring those manufacturing jobs back to Washington, and implementing a capital gains tax doesn't get us there.
We could fund every dime of the good things that we've heard about in this budget without raising taxes. And we could fund every dime of the good things we've heard about without the budget stabilization account workaround transfer that's in here.
When I was first elected to this body in 2014, the budget spent $34 billion. This one before us spends $58 billion. That's a 70% increase, and this is just my fourth term. This budget is funded by a tax that I believe to be unpopular and unconstitutional, that could be thrown out by voters or the courts at any point, which would create a significant hole in the budget and make us unable to fund the many good things that have been described on the floor. I believe that the tax that it relies upon is highly volatile, and even if it isn't thrown out in its entirety by courts or voters, there will be years in which we don't recognize nearly as much revenue as we assume, which will cause us again to make difficult cuts to many of these important programs like the Working Families Tax Exemption. I'm also concerned, Mr. Speaker, that this relies on a tax that will hamper our recovery efforts. We heard from many members on both sides of the aisle how important it is for this budget to help get Washington State back to work and recovered, but I'm deeply concerned that taxing innovators and entrepreneurs will hamper that very recovery. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, as we've pointed out time and time again, this new tax is simply not necessary. We can fund every last dime that is funded in the underlying budget without assuming this tax. I agree this budget funds many good things, but my Republican colleagues and I, we cannot support a budget that relies on an unnecessary, unstable, unpopular, and unconstitutional tax that jeopardizes funding for all of the other good things in the budget. Washingtonians deserve better.